Well, just a week or so ago, you saw what happened in Detroit, and we talked about it on this show. And the biggest concern I had was that Detroit could really become played out in a lot of cities across this country, and there could be possibly a domino effect. That's my big concern. I'm also afraid that if Detroit does not pay their debts to the capital markets, bondholders obviously got hit. What does it mean in terms of other cities raising capital as well? And now this seems to be unfolding now in Chicago as well, and there's some real concern there. Joining us is Matt Patterson, labor policy expert at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and we're going to talk about Chicago. Matt, thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be here. Let me just get my jacket off. Hold on one sec. There we go. Now it feels like Friday.
Now it feels like Friday, right? No jacket on a Friday is definitely a Friday thing. You know what? We may go to no ties next week. We'll see. I'll talk to Steve about it. So, Matt, I'm hearing some information out there. I'm a finance guy, and I look at balance sheets and I look at income statements and I look at Chicago, and if it was a stock, I'd be shorting it.
Yeah, the news from Chicago is not good. I mean, downgraded by Moody's. I mean, it's just a horrible thing. And this is one of the largest, most global cities we have. It's an awful situation. However, I do think there's some important differences between Chicago and Detroit that we should keep in mind. And actually, there's a couple of ways that Detroit is very unique. And that's not to say that other cities don't have their problems and there's going to be huge pension liabilities that are going to come due. But I think Detroit was unique for several ways, and one of them is the United Auto Workers Union. Detroit is basically a one-industry town. And you have one union that basically took over that entire industry. And when the industry went kaput, it sort of helped drag the city along down with it. Chicago is a very different story. And I think the role of the United Auto Workers Union in the death of Detroit has been really and shamefully underreported.
Matt, as I said, I'm a finance guy, and I look at assets, and I look at two sides of the balance sheet. What about cash in Chicago? I saw a figure out there that just knocked my socks off, and I can't even believe it's true. Maybe you can weigh in on this. I saw that at one point, maybe it was only briefly, their cash levels got down to $33 million. That's very, very low for a major city.
Well, I hadn't heard that number, but it is very, very low. The most horrendous thing about these sort of cash shortages and pension liabilities is how much it hurts poor people and working class people the most, the people who really depend on the vital public services, police, firefighters, I mean, those services, when they go, it hurts the whole city, but especially the people who are most vulnerable. So I think that's what you're really going to be have to be worried about. And when you have a situation where you have Chicago, which is already a very dangerous city, you have cutbacks in police and firefighters, it becomes more dangerous. Then that just sort of starts a flight of investment and the tax base from the city, like we saw in Detroit for decades, people just moving out in droves because it just got to be too dangerous to live there. I think that's when you start a death spiral as far as demographics and the tax base goes.
Well, there's an interesting correlation there, and you bring up a very important point. And one of the things that really did kill Detroit was the mass exodus of people out of Detroit. There were many living in the suburbs, but I mean the population had literally disintegrated over decades, and that erodes the tax base, your ability to create revenue. People abandon the property, so you're not even going to get any money on the property taxes. Is there any evidence of that people are actually starting to pick up and leave Chicago?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I think Chicago is a much more diverse town as far as industry and population. I don't think you're seeing that yet in Chicago. But again, how long can these types of violent crime rates sustain a population that size? Sooner or later, and especially if police and fire services get cut back, people are going to leave. And the Detroit population drain is really one of the most astonishing trends in American history. And at the end of World War II, they had about 1.5, almost 2 million people. Now it's less than 700,000, I think. I mean, it's just a tremendous erosion of population, and you're right, the tax base. And again, I have to come back to the United Auto Workers Union, who had a real role in eroding that tax base. In the first 12 years of this century, the big three automakers shed about 200,000 jobs. That's about 60% of its salaried workforce. That's a tremendous hit for the tax base of a city that's already having a hard time paying its bills.
Well, let's go back. Let's talk about Chicago for a second. We've identified the problem, and now the question is, what is the solution? And what are they doing? What is the government there doing to help stem this exodus and do something to beef up the finances? They got to do something.
Well, the first thing that's got to happen is the public sector unions have got to be taken under control. I mean, I know Rahm Emanuel, he really stood up to the teachers union last year, and we lauded him for that. We covered that story very closely. But, the public sector unions have just driven up the cost of government so much with these collective bargaining agreements that cost the taxpayer enormous sums, billions and billions of dollars, and not just in salaries, but legacy costs, pension, health care, that are in many instances much better than you would get in the private sector. That has to be addressed. And I think, especially if you're Rahm Emanuel or any politician in Illinois, and you have competitors in neighboring states like Mitch Daniels in Indiana or Scott Walker in Wisconsin, who have really tamed their public sector unions and brought the cost of government down to the point where those states are now very, very attractive to businesses. I think at the very least, Rahm Emanuel has some great examples in his neck of the woods as far as how to bring the city's budget in line and how to attract new businesses to the city.
You seem to like what he's doing. I mean, how would you rate his efforts so far?
Well, I would say it's been very mixed. I was really pleased with the way he stood up to the teachers union. He's been less well in other areas. But I think for a Democratic politician in a major, very liberal American city, I think he's been, fairly good. I mean, better than you used to be able to.
Well,
expect.
let's see how that pans out. Let's hope it gets